Sure. So my name's Peter Stapleton, and I'm hailing from Queensland, Australia during this conference talk. So it's nice and sunny over here, and we're in the middle of summer. So very hot, very hot. My work, I guess, in this research field has very much been in investigating EFT, emotional freedom techniques, for food cravings in overweight and obese people. So I've spent 5 years now, Bonn University being the latest university that I'm at, exploring that and having great fun, and most recently I've also replicated and extended one of Dawson's trials, which has been
about what it is that you do. Oh, John,
sure.
Can you just mute yourself while Peter carries on introducing himself, and I'll hand over to you formally.
John, come on. What have you got to say for yourself, John? You come and you interrupt one of the speakers. You're supposed to be hosting. Come on, John.
Investigating EFT, emotional freedom techniques.
So everyone needs to close the videos. Any videos you've got open where you've been watching the stream live need to be closed in the background. Yeah? So everything should be closed. Peter, sorry. Try that again. Oh, carry on, please. Had you finished?
Do you want me to just pick up from somewhere?
Oh, yeah, please. Pick up wherever you felt interrupted.
Okay.
Okay.
We there?
We better wait for John.
I'm here.
Okay, John,
Okay.
you're in. Would you like to put your lower thirds on and then take over? Peter was just introducing herself.
Okay, well, I'll start introducing first. I'd like to say good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, or good whatever it is, wherever in the world you may happen to be.
Brilliant.
My name is John Freedom. I serve as research coordinator for ACEP with the Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology, and our upcoming discussion is entitled Current Research in Energy Medicine and Energy Psychology. Now, many of our members have had the experience of going to conferences and giving these glowing reports and testimonials about using EP methods with their clients. And the person they're talking to will listen politely, but sooner or later they'll pop the question. And they'll say, but that's all very nice, but is there any research on this stuff? And so to help us answer that question, I have the privilege of discussing this with three of the preeminent researchers in the field: Dr. Bill Bankston, who's the developer of the Bankston Method of Energy Healing; Dr. Dawson Church, who's the director of the Soul Medicine Institute and editor of the Energy Psychology Journal; and Dr. Peter Stapleton, a clinical psychologist and researcher from Queensland, Australia. Okay, so let's have our panelists introduce themselves briefly, and Peter, why don't you go ahead?
Thanks, John. Great to be here. So my name's Peter Stapleton, and I'm a clinical and health psychologist here in Queensland, Australia. I am assistant professor at Bonn University and have spent the last 5 years researching and coordinating clinical trials, primarily in the area of emotional freedom techniques and looking at food cravings, obesity, weight loss in overweight and obese adults. So we've had great success, we've had great fun, we've obviously had outstanding results, and some of those will get talked about today, I'm sure. And most recently we've replicated one of Dawson's trials where we've looked at extending and replicating his depression trial in adults. And again, we're showing that techniques like emotional freedom techniques, or EFT, are having longevity over time, and certainly more superior than some of the comparable treatments that we've been analysing against. So we've had great fun here. We have been doing this for about 5 years, like I said, and we've got another 2 planned for this year, another big 2 clinical trials. And we're moving now into the area of adolescence. So we're taking this into the younger age groups and continuing our research, and I look forward to chatting about that today.
Great, Peter, thank you. Okay, and Bill, go ahead.
Thanks for the invitation, first of all. Nice to see you, John. In my day job, I'm a professor at St. Joseph's College in New York, and I'm primarily responsible for teaching research methods, statistics, data analysis, things like that, and also I supervise a whole lot of theses. In terms of unorthodox kinds of things, I'm the president of the Society for Scientific Exploration, which is an international group of scientists, maybe 1,000 scientists in 45 countries, something along those lines. And just as an advertisement, if there's any of you folks who are really interested in research, I would strongly recommend looking into the society. I investigate primarily healing. This is my main area, and I've been doing this for over 30 years. I started out eons ago with some clinical observations of a healer, and among the annoying things that he did was he cured me, and that's kind of rude to a skeptic. And so I started to go into looking into some of the clinical cases and such. After a while, I got a little bit frustrated because I couldn't control enough variables. I guess I'm a closet control freak, and so for the past 30 years, I've been in labs, and I do experiments on cell cultures. I do experiments on animals, and probably the most interesting for the audience is I have about a dozen plus experiments at this point in 6 medical schools using animal models, mice animal models that have 100% fatality. And what I do is I train them in healing techniques. These are inexperienced volunteers who don't believe, and I get them to cure cancer. And the cancer is cured. Not only is it cured for life, but the mice are immune to further injections of the cancer. And at this point now, I've got a number of experiments going on where we're trying to replicate this without the healer. In effect, trying to bottle healing. And so that stuff is pretty interesting. In addition to that, I have a whole variety of functional MRI studies, EEG studies, geomagnetic probes. I got a bunch. I'll stop talking.
Okay. Yeah, and of course, you'll have a further chance to talk more about that in a little bit. Okay, but let's first hear from Dawson. Hey, Dawson.
Hey, John. It's good to be here, and great to be with Bill, and also with Peter and you. And I am focused on, at the moment, really focused on the whole question of PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. And I've been coordinating a large project called the Veterans Stress Project, where we offer EFT, or emotional freedom techniques, to veterans coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, also Vietnam, even Korean War veterans. And we're finding that it has a dramatic effect on their PTSD symptoms. They drop substantially, and they stay low thereafter. We follow them for up to a year, and they stay low. So that's my major research focus at this point. But in my book, The Genie in Your Genes, I talk about the link between gene expression and emotions. And this is a fascinating new area of research, because we're showing now that techniques like energy medicine, like EFT, are epigenetic. They literally affect gene expression, not just the expression of 1 or 2 genes. They aren't magic bullets that will affect the expression of 1 or 2 genes or a handful of genes. They're actually affecting the expression sometimes of over 1,000 genes. And these genes have to do with things like programmed cell death, longevity, telomere length, inflammatory response, immune response. All of these genes are being affected, these key regulatory genes being affected by these kinds of interventions. So the picture that's being painted here is that these interventions are really powerful medicine. They are as powerful as medicine. If they were a drug, they'd be all over the place. But they often are far more powerful, far more pervasive than any single targeted magic bullet type drug we could dream up. So I'm really interested in establishing an evidence base behind EFT and then other forms of energy medicine, and showing that these are potent medical interventions with widespread applications for social problems like PTSD, anxiety, and depression.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'd like to step back a minute. Dawson, thank you. And this should be an obvious question, but it's not obvious for everyone. So, but why is clinical research so important? Why do we have to demonstrate this? You know, a lot of clinicians seem to have this attitude, well, we know that it works, you just tap on it and it goes away, or we know it works with our clients. Why do we have to have research about this?
Well, there are several reasons. I think, can I jump in here, John?
Yeah, please, please.
If you are, for example, a physician in a big HMO or in a big hospital, if you're a psychotherapist in the Veterans Administration, you need the assurance that the therapies you're offering your patients or your clients are evidence-based. You wouldn't go to a doctor who'd say something like, gee, I've invented this pill in the last week, and I think it's really great. Why don't you go and try it? We require the standard. In fact, with Obamacare, there's now a really stronger focus on, does this stuff really work? So if you're a responsible medical professional, you want to make sure you're giving your patients, your clients, things that really work. And that's one reason for research. Research just asks the question, if it's outcome research, does this really work? Now, the deeper level of research that I think Bill's going to talk about later on probably is how this works. And is there energy involved? What are the mechanisms of action that underlie these phenomena? But the fact that it works is the first thing we establish. You first establish that something works. We knew that quinine worked, willow bark worked for hundreds of years before we knew how willow bark or quinine worked. We knew how various kinds of medications, aspirin, for example, worked for decades before we knew how it worked. So the first question is, does it work? And if it does work, we can start to offer it to patients or clients. Then the next question is, how does it work? But it's an essential thing to show that these interventions are evidence-based so that they can be widely adopted in primary care. Without that evidence base, they will not be widely adopted no matter how many stories, even if there are thousands of stories. There's just anecdotes, and we have that solid evidence base. And then you can go to primary care, you can testify before Congress, you can go into big medical systems. I present to psychiatrists and medical doctors quite fearlessly because we have the data to prove it. So you go to these systems and then encourage them to learn these techniques and apply those in those settings where the patients and the people are.
Great. Okay. Bill or Peter?
Well, I would agree with everything that Dawson just said. I would add to that simply that the research also teaches humility. That it's pretty easy to fool oneself. I think Dawson might agree with me.
I've read all your research, Bill, so yes.
One of that I think is the greatest strength of a researcher is the humility that you learn when you actually put your ideas to a test. And so I think it's the most common experience of most people, researchers or not, that they rely on their personal experience and they rely on anecdote. And when you put your ideas to systematic tests, the world is far more complex than at least my simple mind is able to grasp. And so I've become extraordinarily more humble by doing decades of research. Research rarely turns out neatly and cleanly the way that I anticipate it to. And so I look forward to being proven wrong most of the time, and I look forward to finding out the world is far more complex than I can comprehend.
All right, great, thank you. Okay.
And John, maybe if I could just add, as a third point on that, at this academia level, I think what clinical research does is it then can filter down into our teaching practices. So, you know, William would probably agree that by having this evidence base behind any new therapy or existing therapy allows us then to take that further and teach it. So, you know, I'm teaching at that master's level where these students are about to graduate and about to go out there and work. But what these research trials do for us is allow us to have the evidence so that we can actually then take this further and teach it to these next generations safely and securely in the knowledge that it's got the evidence behind it.
Great, great. Okay. So, Bill, you were talking about, you know, teaching, you know, students who have no belief in healing to actually heal cancer in mice. And then, Dawson, you were talking about these experiments with gene expression, which are just as effective or even more efficacious than some drugs. And so if the evidence is there, and actually Dr. Melinda Connor spoke about this earlier today about, you know, skeptics who are not willing, you know, to actually even look or examine the evidence. But why do you think, why is there such resistance or pushback to the resistance for, I mean, to the research for energy medicine and energy psychology?
Well, if I can jump in first, John, I honestly have not found a lot of skepticism or resistance, and I presented at probably over 100 medical and psychology conferences. I found that most physicians, when I tell them that many physical diseases have emotional roots, that the psychological, the emotional, the spiritual component of people dramatically affects their health, all these doctors that I present to nod, and they are really well aware of that, so I have not found a lot of skepticism myself. What I have found, though, is that there's a hardcore of diehard skeptics who won't believe what the evidence shows, regardless of how good the evidence is or how much of it there is, and you simply can't convince them. And so when I hit one of those kinds of skeptics, I just change the subject and go to talk to somebody else. There are many people who will listen to us and who are receptive to this. And honestly, Western medicine is in a crisis. It's in a crisis of cost. It's a crisis of complexity, and it's a crisis of being unable to address a whole class of diseases, the lifestyle diseases like diabetes, obesity, metabolic syndrome. It's in a crisis of being unable to address autoimmune diseases like fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, and so on. So there's this whole class of diseases to which our old medical model really does not transfer well. And so all this is a whole convergence of factors that are forcing us to change and take a really hard look at what we do. So I think all of these things together are combining to make the skeptics, even the skeptics, have to look for answers. And if it's evidence-based, the answers are right there.
Yeah, I'd like to chime in with a slight sidebar on that, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I've spoken by invitation at a number of skeptic societies, and I usually begin a talk at a skeptic society by suggesting I'm the only skeptic in the room. And then they get real mad at me right away, which is a good thing. And I suggest to them that they're not skeptics at all, they're believers. They already believe that the things I haven't said are wrong. And so they don't even get to the point of looking at the evidence before they fold their arms and their legs and their minds and close up. And I would recommend, though I'm not disagreeing with Dawson, I would recommend that my experience anyway is there are more believers than not, and it doesn't make any difference what the belief is in. And so you can have believers who I think we misused the word skeptic. You have believers who believe that all this energy medicine stuff is nonsense, and you have believers who believe that all the energy medicine stuff is true. And I would suggest to you that they're all believers, and that this is the reason why research is so valuable, that if you're willing not to defend your beliefs, but rather to test your ideas with the assumption that you're already wrong, in the sense that nobody's got a complete picture, and so you go out and Peter goes out and does studies on EFT, or Dawson does, and if they don't come out of the study knowing less than they went in, and are a little more confused and seeing it, and so that they ought to be always questioning their own ideas.
Yeah. Very well said. Thank you. Okay. So I'd like to step back a little bit. So common to both energy medicine and energy psychology, of course, and the whole realm of energy and vibrational healing is this concept of energy. And one of the big criticisms of it is that, the skeptics say, or, I know what you call them, skeptics or believers, whoever we want to call these folks. But of course, this force is not electromagnetic in nature or gravitational, and certainly not either the strong or weak force. And so what do you think is the exact nature of this energy, and the best way to measure it, or the best way to begin to demonstrate that this energy actually really exists in objective ways that everyone can, beyond the shadow of a doubt, say, yes, we can measure this, yes, this actually exists, yes, here is what it is?
Well, let me start with a story from the history of medicine. And if you read the history of medicine and history of psychology, it's full of interesting examples of these kinds of questions. A Dutch physician called Willem Einthoven in the 1890s was obsessed with the idea that each organ in the body had its own electromagnetic field. Now, nobody believed him. They thought he was a crackpot, but he began to build galvanometers to try and detect the field of the human heart. And he built, at that time, the world's most sensitive galvanometer, and tried to detect the heart's field, and he failed. So the skeptics were all like, see, there's crazy old Einthoven trying to do this again. So what did he do? Now again, there was no evidence that what he was looking for was really there, and the only evidence that came out of his first research was that it wasn't there. And being a stubborn Dutchman, he just kept on going and built a more sensitive galvanometer and failed again, and failed again, and failed again, and kept on building more and more and more sensitive galvanometers. Till in 1903, he discovered the electromagnetic field of the human heart. This went out in medical history books. He won the Nobel Prize for medicine in 1924 for his discovery, and really helped inspire Hans Berger, who discovered the field of the human brain. So that led to the discovery of the 4 major brain waves and so on. But there's no evidence initially that any of this stuff exists until we built the instruments. So we do eventually build the instruments, we see the effects, but you see the effects first. You see that aspirin works, you see that quinine works, then you go on and try and discover how it works, and that can take a long time. And there's no good reason to prevent delivering good therapies like EFT, like energy medicine, to patients with the argument that we don't know how it works. We just haven't developed the instrumentation yet to show how it works, and it could be decades before that's done. PET scans, SPECT scans, the whole basis of the MRI, that was suspect for many, many, many years. That comes a long time after we see the effects in the clinic of effective therapies. So yes, we will eventually discover those fields, I believe, but the fact we haven't yet is no reason not to use these therapies.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. I don't know. I have a number of research projects going on right now in trying to figure out what this thing is, and I can tell you that I have no clue whether I'll be successful or not, because I'm not exactly sure the right way to think about this stuff. And so I'll give you a certain irony here. For example, I have a book out called The Energy Cure. And when the publisher said they were going to call it The Energy Cure, I said, I'm not sure if there's an energy. And they said, well, thank you for your input, and they called it The Energy Cure anyway. I don't know if it's energy or if, I suspect it's rather information. I think healing is more informational than energetic. So I've got a number of studies detecting changes in physical space from a distance by intentional healing. So if we're curing mice, we can cure mice at 2 inches away, and we can cure mice at 2,000 miles away. And you can also measure as secondary correlates changes in the geomagnetics of the physical space that the mice are in. And it turns out that the signal is identical whether it's 2 inches or 2,000 miles. Now, I have no idea how that can be an energy. And of course, the next question would be, well, what is it? And the answer is, I don't know. So there's no question something's there, but whether we're properly conceptualizing it as an energy, I don't know. If energy and information are fungible, maybe, but we don't really have I don't have the language that's a good descriptor. We can measure something, but I don't know if we're measuring it.
Well, we know it's not, because Dean Radin, my friend Dean Radin at the Institute of Genetic Sciences, close to here, they're collaborating with us on a research project right now. And one of his earlier studies, he had cancer patients and their loved ones in the study, and the loved one would send healing intentions to the cancer patient. Now, the cancer patient was in a sealed room, a Faraday cage, that screened out all known electromagnetic frequencies. Absolutely none entered or left. Even the cables going between the two research locations were fiber optics. They weren't transmitting any kind of energy that was known. So even in those circumstances, there was a shift when ruling out every single known energy in a shielded Faraday cage, a lead-lined box. I mean, this is like a 4-ton lead-lined box that this person's in, shielding out all known radiation. It still works. So we have no idea what these energies are, what these forces are, but they're not known energies. That's for sure.
But something happens.
But something happened.
There clearly is an effect, but as Dawson says, what is it? I don't know. And maybe energy is the right word. Maybe it's the wrong word. The bottom line is nobody knows. But as he said a number of times, that doesn't detract from the phenomenon itself.
Yes.
Mm.
Okay. Peter, you want to jump in there, or? Okay.
Look, completely agree with what Dawson and William are both saying, that we're probably right at the precipice of still learning all of this, that It's probably why I like EFT, because I can at least run a trial on that and play it out and, you know, measure different things. Because, yeah, I think the whole field is still an unknown. But I agree with Dawson, the effect is there, so we still see it, and we are still seeing people be interested in that. So to me, yeah, we've got to keep moving forward and do what we can do to at least measure and capture this.
John, I also want to observe that I think the whole energy discussion has been a real red herring, and it's actually prevented EFT and other energy therapies from getting a foothold in primary care. And the reason was well-intentioned. What happened was when pioneers like John Diamond and Goodhart and Roger Callahan in the 70s began to discover that the stimulation, the manual stimulation of acupressure points had a healing effect, both on physical problems like pain and also psychological problems. There were no explanatory models in physiology at that time in biology. We didn't know in the 70s about psychoneuroimmunology, how your thoughts are creating chemicals which are carrying messages all over your body. We didn't know about epigenetics. We hadn't even coined the term then. We didn't know that gene expression was being affected by these things. We didn't know about neural plasticity. So in the absence of any hard science explanations for why these seemingly miraculous cures were happening, they said, well, it must be quantum entanglement. It must be something like subtle energy. But that explanatory model really alienated these therapies from the mainstream. And now, of course, we've done enough research now with EEGs to show that there are changes happening in the brain. I did the cortisol study showing that it affects cortisol levels dramatically to do EFTs. Now we know, oh, it's affecting cortisol, it's affecting neurotransmitters, it's affecting neuroplasticity, it's having effects on our gene expression. So now we do have all those explanatory mechanisms. So I'm really in favor of abandoning, at least for the time being, all trying to load all the explanatory freight on the energy train, and rather saying, hey, it affects our physiology, and I can stand up in front of a medical conference and talk about that, and all the doctors are comfortable with that. If I try to explain it in terms of energy, all I do is give them something to wrestle with, and that's not that doesn't fit well with their explanatory model of how we work as biological beings. So it's much easier just to say, hey, it works. Here are some physiological things I can show that are happening in the body when we offer these therapies. Let's go ahead and use them, and leave the whole energy question till later.
Yeah, Dawson, that point is well taken. I mean, the whole energy question may be premature. We may not solve that for another 100 or even several hundred years. So I'd like to ask all of you, what have we learned? What do we know about, about the energy field, about the effects of these modalities, etc.? What do we know about energy medicine and energy psychology? And what is still on the horizon? What do we still need to learn?
Oh, I mean, I'd be happy to start with a simple answer, and that is we know very little. and I don't think that is a put down of the field or fields. I think that's the case if you really went, let's say Dawson goes to a medical conference and speaks to the doctors, and I think he was exactly on point where he says, essentially I'm speaking to them in the language they understand. But they also have a model within which they try to fit everything of the language that they understand. And if you really examine any medical, and I'm talking traditional medical field, question, very little is known. And when you're talking about from a clinical point of view, the mindset of a clinician is very different from the mindset of a basic researcher. And I think that's a tension that's going on in our discussion here. I remember sitting down with a physician friend of mine, and he was interested in some of my cancer research. And he said, well, what is it that you do, and what is it that you taught the skeptical volunteers? And I kept, in my researcher's brain, I kept saying, yeah, I don't know this, I don't know this, I don't know this. And I was emphasizing all the stuff I don't know. And he said, who cares? It works. And then we both sat in silence and stared at each other for a couple of minutes. And then I think I said, you're an idiot. And then he said to me, no, you're an idiot. It works. What's your problem? And I said, well, my problem is I don't know how it works. And we talked past each other. And I think Dawson has hit that exactly right, that there's a difference between a clinical mindset and a researcher's mindset. And to say, what do we know, It's a very different question to ask, what is it that a clinician is able to apply and get results? Is a very different question from, what do we know about the underlying mechanism? So if Dawson or Peter would say, if I do this, this, and this, I have evidence that I get an effect, that's very different than understanding what the underlying mechanism is. See, if you get someone trying to fix someone else, to ask, what do you know, there's a lot of things that'll work. How they work is a different question, and it's two different mindsets. I'm one of those annoying people who wants to find out the underlying mechanism, and so I just keep scratching my head. So if you ask me, what do we know, I say not much. But the reality is, in clinical application, there's a lot that's known, and there's a lot of stuff that has, I think, reasonably proven efficacy.
Yes.
I think also another component of that is compassion. Why are we doing this? Why, in the case of the Veteran Stress Project that I head up, why are we spending all this time, all this energy to get this PTSD treatment to all these veterans and family members? It's because we care. We know it works and we care, and we can make a difference in society. After Vietnam, all these people came back from the war, didn't get any proper treatment for PTSD, and a lot of them wound up in prison, homeless, doing domestic violence, drugs, unemployed, huge social tragedy as a result of a failure to treat PTSD after the Vietnam War. And I just said, I'm going to do everything I possibly can after Iraq and Afghanistan to make sure that we don't do that again. And so that's the clinician's impulse. That's practical research. That's applying research to the most pressing social problems. If we can, and now the miracle is that we really can have an impact on these problems. Our studies show there have been several clinical trials now, so randomized controlled trials, showing that the vast majority of veterans and their family members are free of PTSD symptoms after we worked with them for a few sessions. And Peter has the same, I know from her work, she has the same kind of compassion. You can't imagine how much people who are overweight or obese suffer. And with her research, she's able to offer them the tools to shift that. Imagine if we as a society were to shift these huge, major mental health problems. A century ago, it wasn't mental health we were worried about as a society. It was things like cholera, diphtheria, smallpox, typhoid, and so on. But a small group of determined people said, we are going to find a cure for these, and we are going to eradicate these diseases. Now, suddenly, in the early part of the 21st century, we just suddenly, out of the blue, in the last 20 years, found these radical remedies to problems like anxiety, depression, pain, obesity, and PTSD. So that's really what is exciting to me. That's the clinician's mindset in action. Is let's go there and let make a huge difference here. I know that Peter, you care a lot about those people you work with.
I get thousands of them that want to come. I think it probably is what draws us into this field in the first place. That as psychologists, psychiatrists, healers, we have that as qualities. So I think it's a unique position to be in, where you can then get to do the research on it and find that evidence to back it up as well. So thank you for including me in that, Dawson, because I completely agree. I think we need that aspect in order to be able to take these things. I just want to be around when everyone accepts this and we can see that. So I want this to happen in my lifetime, so I could get to see that happen. Because we know it, we just need all of the rest of the world to catch up. So yeah, completely agree. Think that, we've got a lot to offer, and somewhere we've been given this gift. So it's paying it forward now, isn't it? It's really combining the research and the evidence.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So Dawson, you've talked a little bit about this already, but I'd like to ask each of you, what do you think is the most important or the most fascinating things that you're learning or you have learned from your own research work? Most important or most fascinating? And Peter, we can start with you since you're up.
Yeah, thanks, John. I guess, my field really is this overweight, obese. What stood out to us in the most recent trials that we've been running is this epigenetic influence. So Dawson touched on it earlier, but the majority of people that we seem to be treating or that are attracted in are falling in this area, or this age group of, mid-40s. mainly women, of course, so emotional eating, weight issues. But what we're noticing is this influence, I guess, epigenetically of where their parents came from and their grandparents and the issues around food. So in running these trials with EFT and these type of things, that's really stood out to us and something we weren't looking for. So it's been fascinating to actually look at that and then be able to help these type of people move through that, of course, with techniques like EFT. So to me, we're getting added extras. I guess that's what's coming about. We're not just proving that this stuff lasts over time, or yes, it's as efficacious as another comparable treatment, but we're noticing things that are linking at a genetic level, and that's really stood out in our research in the last sort of 6 to 12 months. So I'm glad Dawson mentioned that, because it was an unexpected finding for us.
Yeah, one of the wonderful things about research is you often discover things you're not even looking for in connections.
Most definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Bill or Dawson?
Go ahead, Dawson.
I think that the research project I'm most curious about now is one where we are, again, using veterans with high levels of PTSD symptoms. We're giving them 10 sessions of EFT, not 6 as the previous research used. And we're measuring their gene expression before and after. And so we're now drilling deeper. So the cortisol trial was a good, interesting start. But the reason that your cortisol goes down is that something is sending an epigenetic signal to the genes that code for cortisol to downregulate or shut down. And so is EFT able to send that epigenetic signal to those genes that code for cortisol and other things and shift those? So that's the most interesting study that we're about to wrap that one up, and we'll be publishing the results probably this year. So that's one really interesting one. But it's really time now, I think, for biomedical research into EFT. Things like MRI studies. It would be fascinating to see what happens in the brain. The brain, essentially, the midbrain is the emotional brain. It's the brain, part of the brain that processes fear. And if you look at the EEG signals of people who have fear, that all the EEG frequencies characteristic of midbrain activity are highly expressed. And so I'd love to put people in an MRI, or even better in an MEG, magnetic encephalograph, which is kind of a real-time MRI, and see what happens in their midbrain when that happens. Now, for that, you need serious money for that kind of research. So we're hoping that we're going to be able to do that MRI research in the next while. That's really the big frontier. And then, of course, making presentations and driving these research findings into primary care. It's, you do research like this so you can apply it where people are suffering. So we don't have 500,000 veterans suffering. So really drilling this research into the medical curriculum and the and primary care settings. That's the next really powerful focus for me. How is it accepted by veterans? Research and things, questions like how well do they take to it? How can we explain it to them? How if they're offered, say, alternative medicine in a primary care setting, how many of them say yes? Can it overcome their skepticism? Those kinds of research questions that have to do with applying it to large numbers of people as well.
Dawson, just as a sidebar, this isn't published yet, but I have a study with functional MRIs, and in the functional MRI we have a contrast mode, so on-off kind of a thing. And what I have is healers in an MRI and also healees in an MRI. But the more interesting one is the healers in an MRI. It turns out I can get a reliable change in the functional MRI in toggling on and off healing intention. But the interesting part isn't that by intention. The interesting part is that we can also stick somebody in an MRI, and the only thing sticking out of an enclosed MRI is their hand, and into their hand, double blind, are dropped sham envelopes with nothing in them, and also envelopes with pictures and hair samples of cancerous animals 600 miles away, and the brain knows to 100% certainty, without conscious awareness, and turns the healing on. And so my suggestion is going to be that healing and intention may not be that strongly related, and healing may instead be an autonomic response to need.
Wow. Which brain regions are you seeing active?
I'm sorry?
Which brain regions are you seeing active?
Well, it actually turns out it's even more interesting than that. It floats. So I can't get a complete, just a localized signal. I get the on-off. Sometimes it's the eye region, sometimes it's the parietal, sometimes it's occipital. And the on-off contrast floats in the brain, which indicates to me it may in fact be a generic kind of a thing, not located in a specific spot in the brain.
Wow. Or maybe calling forth different brain functions depending on the need. Again, if it's need-based, it could be,
Yes. We've also done EEG work with healer and healee at a distance with synchronized EEGs sampling every 500th of a second, and we get phase locking of the brain.
So the brain of the healee entrains that of the healer?
Yes. Pretty interesting stuff.
Amazing.
Okay, everyone, we have about 5 minutes. So one final question. If you had an unlimited amount of money, an unlimited budget, what would you be studying or researching now?
I'd be kissing the feet of the person who gave it to me for a start.
Yeah.
Wow.
If money were no object.
Well, I mean, I'd be happy to tackle that. I've got a very large grant proposal out, and so I would love to get to the feet kissing stage. The check, as far as I know, isn't in the mail, but I haven't checked today's mail. But I'm trying to bottle this, and so the issue is, can we get to a technique that will reproduce the anomalous healing without the healer? And that is, it turns out to be an extraordinarily complex problem, and it requires a whole ton of money. And the idea would be, can we bottle it, and can we turn it into a therapy, reproducible? We're not sure by what mechanism yet. So I mean, that would clearly be my my priority.
Okay.
Right.
Maybe I'll jump in. Funnily enough, same as Dawson, I've been talking for some years now about the MRI type of study, particularly in the area of weight and food. So the areas of the brain that light up, and obviously the impact then of EFT on the brain structures. So yeah, I've been shouting that one around Bonn University for some years now, but nobody is giving me any money. So I will just keep begging, but I think that would be fascinating to be able to show quite distinctly and completely, obviously, the impact at that brain level through MRI. So that's my wish list, and hopefully one that will come true in the near future.
Great, thank you. Okay.
There's one I draw from cancer research, John.
Yes.
And that is, if you're a poor person getting chemotherapy, you go into the hospital and you get stop chemotherapy. You get your Taxol or whatever it is they pump you full of. If you're a rich person, what's probably going to happen is they're going to take some of your cancer cells, culture them, and then they're going to create a customized chemotherapy blend of different kinds of agents that works on your personal cancer. So personal medicine is a new kind of concept in medicine, and I'd love to see personalized therapies developed for energy psychology and other kinds of therapies as well. And we can tell from people's gene expression what's going on. So a certain approach, for example, a mixture of yoga, mindfulness, and EFT might work great for one person, and it might not work well for another person. And how we would know that is their gene expression, or maybe we'd use other kinds of tools, but we need cheap, fast, quick to read assays that show us what's happening inside the person's body, and be able to prescribe routines for them that work for that person. One size does not fit all. We find that about 14% of veterans don't respond to EFT. So what can we give them? What mix of interventions will help for them? So applying the whole concept of personalized medicine to energy therapies as well, and then finding a blend of, what do you need direct intervention? What do you need drugs? You do need drugs. I mean, it's not as if we're going to toss out the whole of modern medicine. All of these advantages of modern medicine are fantastic, and we can apply them but intelligently as part of a suite of integrative therapies. So as we have gene tests, as we have EEG tests, as we have maybe personal MRIs, we're going to develop the ability to quickly and cheaply customize a medical approach that really works for each individual person, that won't be one size fits all.
Okay, great. This has been a fascinating discussion, of course, but time to end here. So Bill Bankston, Dawson Church, and Peter Stapleton, thank you very much. Good evening.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. What a fantastic discussion. I loved what you said, William in particular. I was looking at researching mindfulness meditation, in fact, all different types of meditation. I was wondering if you've connected what you found to the default mode network.
Your sound cut out.
Oh, I was saying, I'm wondering if you've connected that diffused kind of awareness that you're seeing in the brain to the default mode network.
I don't. It's past my pay grade. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, we'll talk about it. The default mode network is something that the researchers who are working with meditation are finding at the moment, that there's a kind of, if you like, a diffused, delocalized pattern that they're finding, and it's almost like it's like a quantum flux inside the brain, rather than them just being limited and going, oh, which part of the brain is active, which part of the brain is active. They're actually getting quantum on it. Yes,
that would be very close to what I found.
Perfect. Well, let's talk. Where are you in the world?
I'm on Long Island in New York.
Okay. Well, I have family close to there, so let's talk. I'm over in April. We'll talk. I'll connect you to some people down here. Peter, John, it's been a pleasure. And Dawson, it's always a pleasure. Now, Dawson, don't like be out of touch for so long again. I can't take it. I remember our meetings in the jacuzzi. It sounds very romantic. We used to have business meetings in the jacuzzi at IC.
I highly recommend it.
Sorry?
I highly recommend it.
Yeah, that was a great jacuzzi. Right, thank you very much, you guys. It is time for our next session. I encourage everyone to find these fantastic scientists and talk to them about the research they're doing, either in Australia, in the UK, in America. John can coordinate that through, of course, ASAP. So thank you very much. I will bring Fiona back in here. Sorry, Fiona, I forgot to
Thank you, folks. See ya.
Thank you. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
So I'm going to eject you there, Bill. Thank you very much. You can watch it online for the rest. Eject. And Peter, thank you very much. So Fiona, did you want to say something before
I just wanted to add my personal thanks to everybody. That was an absolutely fascinating discussion. MRI, functional MRI, neuroplasticity, epigenetics, it was all coming out. It was brilliant. To have such wonderful minds together on a panel was entertaining and informative and wonderful. And if I ever hear anybody say it again, I wish we'd got the research.
The research money.
Yeah, we're all still looking for the research money, but that really was absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you, John. And we're going to, in a minute, we'll welcome in Bob. But in the meantime, I'm going to, John, you seem to be doubled up. There seem to be two of you. Can you exit and then come back in or something? In the meantime, Craig is still trying to put his lower thirds on. Alina is unable. We'll get to that. So Fiona, you know, that for me is the hot stuff, the research. That's where it's all at.
So exciting.
But
so
you know what?
exciting.
I mean, you know, Dawson says that he's not. The theme seems to be that people, the real researchers, they don't get that much objection from the people they're presenting to at the conferences. But actually, when it comes down to getting the funding, where is the money for the funding? I mean, even Gerald Pollack, who's done this fourth phase of water, who's pretty much discovered a new consciousness in water, a new phase in water. Even that is he's finding it's getting research funding hard. So how we're going to get research funding for energetic things that aren't obviously present? And I liked Dawson's take on energy. I also have been a little bit dismayed by the word energy and the whole use of it.
Well, I think the point that was made that Bill said as well, it is, you know, meeting people where they're at. It's speaking their language. Yes. You know, he goes out, he knows that there is science behind him, and he's just talking about the bits that they're interested in. You know, he just goes in with the, well, you know, this works because of, you know, there is absolutely no hesitation in accepting that a thought will create all these different biochemical reactions in the body. Okay, let's work with that. And he just moves, he starts from a given and carries on. And there's actually a meeting of minds, there's a discussion. There isn't a fight. And as he said, the ones that you come across where they're never going to believe it, why waste your time?
Yeah,